My parents had invited me to a fancy family dinner, expecting us all to enjoy a special evening together. However, I was explicitly told to sit at the kids' table, while my married siblings were seated with the adults. Feeling humiliated and disrespected by this clear divide, I quietly gathered my things and left without a word. Hours later, desperate phone calls from my parents started flooding in, each one pleading for my return and trying to justify their actions. I sensed from the moment I stepped through the door that this Christmas dinner was doomed. It wasn't like I was unaware of the usual chaos. Every year it's the same. But this time I promised myself I would keep it together. I'm Maya, the youngest of 4 siblings, though in my family being the baby never meant endearment. Instead, it became the reason they constantly belittle me. Now 28, to them I'm still the kid, despite my career, a loyal little group of friends, and a hard-won independence. For them, life is only about marriage and children. Our annual Christmas dinner was a big event, one of the rare times the family assembled at my parents' grand Victorian home, a sprawling relic passed down through generations. It was perfect for family photos, yet a nightmare to clean. I'd always hated the place, cold and distant, much like my parents, but tradition kept me coming back every year. I arrived just as the gathering was underway. My oldest brother, Chris, was already there with his wife and 3 kids, noisily setting the table as if he owned the mansion. Then came my sister Amy with her husband and their baby, exuding a flawless, polished image of an ideal life. My parents were in the kitchen, bustling about and managing to make every one of us feel like we were still children. I slipped in quietly, hoping to avoid the inevitable drama. When my mom finally saw me, she greeted me with that saccharine smile that made me feel more tolerated than welcomed. "Maya, sweetie, so glad you could come. Grab a seat," she said, wrapping me in a hug that was more obligatory than affectionate. I barely had time to answer before my dad's booming voice echoed from another room. "Dinner's nearly ready. Chris, Amy, get the kids settled." I froze, unsure of what to do. I wanted to speak up, but it was Christmas. I wasn't ready to cause a scene. Then, in her typical subtle way, my mom added, "Maya, why don't you sit with the kids? We saved a special spot for you with your cousins." I was stunned. I couldn't believe my ears. My mom's overly sweet tone directed me to the kids' table, the one with mismatched chairs, paper plates, and half-hearted decorations. I glanced over at the dining room where the adult table was elegantly set with fine china, wine glasses, and candles, exuding a grown-up sophistication. At the head of that table sat my dad, smugly surrounded by my married siblings, leaving no room for me. I stared at my mom, anger bubbling inside me, a familiar sting from being made to feel insignificant. I forced a smile that never reached my eyes. "Sure, Mom. Thanks," I said evenly, while she returned a smile that betrayed no real concern for my feelings. It was all about appearances for her, with my pain being a mere afterthought. Without another word, I walked over to the kids' table. With each step, my stomach churned. I had hoped, even briefly, that they might treat me like an adult, but reality was harsh. I settled into a small plastic chair amid toddlers, more captivated by their mashed potatoes than the awkward silence that hung in the air. My cousins were lost in their own worlds, completely ignoring me. I eyed the messy plates in front of me. It looked like no one had even tried to make things look decent. I even saw one toddler drop a chunk of broccoli under the table, and it was the final straw. This wasn't merely about the table or tradition. It was a clear message. They saw me as inferior. That realization was the tipping point. I quietly stood up, feeling the weight of my decision. I didn't need to shout or make a scene. I simply grabbed my coat, draped it over my shoulder, and headed straight for the door. As I opened the door, my mom called out, "Maya, where are you going?" Her tone was now laced with confusion and irritation. Without turning back, I said, "I'm leaving. Enjoy your dinner," and slammed the door behind me. The cold air hit me like a wave, but I didn't care. My car was parked just down the street, and soon I was driving away, leaving behind the sound of frantic calls from my family. I drove aimlessly for hours until I finally found refuge in a quiet diner. Sitting alone in a booth, I ordered something warm as my hands still trembled with adrenaline. I couldn't remember the last time I experienced such a mix of anger and relief. Then my phone began buzzing with missed calls and messages, texts from Chris, Amy, and even my dad. But the one that stood out was from my mom. "Where are you? We need to talk. This isn't funny, Maya." A wry smirk crept across my face, the same I'd held all evening. I wasn't ready to call back just yet. The ball was in my court now, and they had no idea what was coming. I set my phone aside and sipped my coffee, watching the steam curl into the air. What would I do next? That was the question, and I knew the answer wouldn't be one they'd appreciate. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, each new message more desperate than the last. Chris's text read, "Maya, this isn't funny. Where are you?" Amy chimed in with, "Mom's freaking out. We just want you back," and my dad insisted, "Don't act like a child. Come back here." I chose silence. I owed them no explanation. They had already made their decision by treating me as a second-class citizen at their precious dinner. All I had ever wanted was to be acknowledged as an adult, but instead, they relegated me to the role of the baby, hidden away with the toddlers. After about an hour, as I rechecked my phone, I felt the mounting tension. They were beginning to realize I wasn't going to simply give in. Then, my mom's text appeared, twisting my stomach in a way that made it clear the real conversation was only just beginning. "I can't understand why you're doing this. Your siblings are worried, and you're ruining Christmas. Don't make this all about yourself. It's selfish." I stared at the message, anger rising once more. Selfish? They were the ones being selfish. The entire evening had been about maintaining their image and meeting their expectations. I was nothing more than a pawn in their perfect picture, and to her, I was the problem. Typical. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so instead, I hit the block button on her number. She wasn't going to manipulate me into guilt, not this time. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I reminded myself that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment reaction. I had a plan. I had been wronged by each and every one of them, and tonight, they would feel the weight of that. Later that evening, after finishing my meal, and as the adrenaline subsided a bit, I opened the family group chat. It was already buzzing with a dozen messages about me. This is ridiculous. She's acting like a child. What's the big deal? And she's overreacting. My fingers itched as I scrolled through them. I could have ignored it, but that would have been too easy. No, I needed them to experience the consequences of their treatment. I started typing slowly at first, but soon my words flowed faster. This wasn't just about tonight. It was about everything they had done over the years. You all don't understand, do you? This isn't just about a seat at the table. It's about how you've treated me my whole life. As if I'm not good enough. As if I only exist when you need something from me. I'm the only one not celebrated for following your script. Get married, have kids, play the game. I've built my own life, and I'm doing just fine. Maybe it's time you recognize that. I paused before sending, letting the weight of my words sink in. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was in control. I no longer needed their approval or to be their little project. Then I pressed send. Almost immediately, messages flooded in. The first came from Dad. Maya, this is ridiculous. You're being dramatic. Get over yourself. Amy quickly followed. You can't just leave like that without expecting us to be upset. What did you think would happen? Then Chris added, we didn't do anything wrong, Maya. Calm down and come back before you ruin everything. Each message stung, and they still didn't understand. They were still pinning it on me, making it seem like my feelings were the problem. I didn't reply. Instead, I did something I'd been contemplating for a while. I opened the Photos app and scrolled until I found an old family picture taken years ago, just before everything fell apart. A picture of a perfect Christmas with everyone smiling, everyone but me. I was there, of course, forced into the frame like an afterthought. I knew the truth behind those smiles, knew the unspoken words and implications of that day. Without a second thought, I posted the photo in the group chat with the caption, here's to the perfect family, always making sure the youngest one knows her place. Then, I switched off my phone and let silence envelop me, feeling finally liberated from their chains. I didn't check my phone for hours. The lack of constant buzzing was strangely calming. For once, I wasn't trying to placate anyone. I stayed up late, pondering what they might be whispering about me behind my back, even though they never had the guts to confront me directly. Especially Chris. I was sure he thought I was overreacting, just being the family drama queen again. But I wasn't. I was done playing the role they had scripted for me. And if they couldn't accept that, they'd have to live with the fallout. Eventually, I plugged in my phone to charge and, with a sigh, checked it again. The notifications were relentless. Dozens of missed calls and texts, some angry, some apologetic, all laced with underlying frustration. I read through them, a grim satisfaction settling over me as I watched them unravel. My mom's text was the longest. I don't know what's gotten into you, Maya. You're acting as if this is about us when it's really about you. You can't just run away from your family. You're tearing us apart. Please, come back. Christmas is ruined without you. This isn't who you are. It was the classic guilt trip, twisting the situation to make me seem like the villain. They always did this, making me feel as though I was the cause of all our problems simply for wanting to be treated like an adult. Then came Dad's message. This is childish. We need to discuss this when you return. And, of course, Chris said, if you think walking out of dinner was going to send a message, you're mistaken. You're making it worse. You owe us an apology. An apology for what? For finally standing up for myself? For demanding to be seen as an equal in a family that only valued me when it suited them? I wasn't apologizing for anything. Amy's message was different from the rest, less angry, more pleading. Maya, I know you're upset and I understand why, but this isn't the way to fix things. You're my sister, and I love you, but you're pushing everyone away. Please, just come home so we can talk. It's Christmas, for God's sake. I stared at her words, remembering how close we once were. As a child, she'd always defended me when the others ganged up on me. But now, I wasn't sure I could trust her, not after everything she had allowed to slide by without speaking up. I took a deep breath, thumb hovering over the screen. I wanted to explain that I wasn't being dramatic. I was simply tired of always being cast as the perpetual child. I typed out a brief reply. I'll think about it, and sent it. I then set my phone aside, feeling a pang of guilt but quickly dismissing it. I couldn't go back to that table, not without a complete change in how they saw me. And I wasn't about to let them simply sweep this under the rug. The next morning, I awoke to even more messages, this time from family friends who were genuinely concerned about my whereabouts. But I wasn't in the mood to explain myself to anyone who wasn't part of the problem. And then, as usual, a barrage of calls from my mom followed. Yet one message stood out. It was from Amy again. Maya, I've been in touch with Chris and Mom. They're extremely upset, and honestly, so am I. We're family. You can't just shut yourself off from us like this. If you don't come back soon, things will only get worse. Please, Don't add more complexity, more pressure, more manipulation, and still no recognition of what I'm truly experiencing. They weren't listening. They didn't understand. I knew exactly what they were doing, as they always do, trying to guilt me into returning, trying to make it seem like I'm the one causing all the problems when, in fact, their refusal to see me as more than just the youngest child is the real issue. I picked up my phone, opened the group chat, and stared at the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, debating what to say next. I wanted to stand my ground and make them understand why I was done with their treatment, but truthfully, I wasn't sure I was ready to go back. Not until I was certain they had changed, until they could see who I really am. Then, my phone buzzed again, this time from Dad. "Maya, we need to talk. You can't keep running away. You're going to regret this." It hit me like a ton of bricks. The same words, the same manipulative guilt trip. I could feel the tension mounting, like the walls were closing in, yet I didn't respond. Not yet. The day dragged on, and with each passing hour, the pressure of their texts, their calls, their attempts to pull me back into their orbit grew stronger. But no matter how many times my phone buzzed, I kept my distance. I had made my choice, and I wasn't about to let them bully me back into the role they had forced upon me. As evening arrived, I found myself alone, staring at an empty chair where I would have sat if I had returned. A part of me, an old part, wanted to give in, to go back and smooth things over. After all, it's Christmas, a time for family and togetherness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I went back now, it would be like admitting I wasn't worth fighting for, that all those years of being pushed aside were acceptable, that they were right, and I was just being melodramatic. I thought about the photo I had posted in the group chat, the one where I was forced into a smile, shoved aside like an afterthought. That picture had said everything. I wasn't just upset about tonight, I was angry about every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering where I was silenced and overlooked. They assumed I'd just roll over and accept it, as I always had. But not this time. Then, the phone rang again. This time it was Mom. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the decline button, but something inside urged me to answer. Perhaps I was finally ready to hear what she had to say, or maybe I was just curious how far they'd go with their guilt tactics. I took a deep breath and pressed the green button. "Maya," Mom's tired, exasperated voice came through. "We need to talk. This has gone on long enough." I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air as she waited for a response. "Look," she continued, "we're family. You're making this far more complicated than it needs to be. I don't know what's gotten into you, but you're pushing everyone away. Your dad is upset, Chris is upset, and Amy," she paused, collecting her thoughts. "I'm upset, Maya. I almost laugh at it. They're upset after everything they've put you through, yet they dare say you're the problem." I could feel the old anger welling up, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't going to let her see how deeply her words still affected me. "I'm not pushing anyone away, Mom," I said calmly but firmly. "I'm just not playing your game anymore. I'm not going to sit at the kids' table, be treated like I'm invisible, and pretend everything's okay." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear her processing my words, trying to twist the conversation back into a guilt trip. "You can't just leave us like this. Your dad is trying to make Christmas special. The whole family is here. It's not just about you, Maya," she pleaded, her voice almost cracking. "You're breaking the family apart. You know I've spent my whole life trying to make things work, trying to fit into the mold you all created, but did anyone ever really see me?" I shot back. "You never wanted me as an adult, Mom. You wanted me to stay the little kid forever." And tonight was the final straw. There was silence again. I could sense she was hearing my truth for the first time. It wasn't just about a seat at the dinner table. It was about every time I had been dismissed and devalued. "I'm sorry, Maya," she finally whispered, her voice soft and uncertain. "I didn't know you felt this way." "Yeah," I replied, my tone softening just a bit. It took me a long time to realize it. There was a long pause, the tension palpable even over the phone. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was reclaiming control, like I finally had a say in how I was treated, and it felt empowering. "Mom," she sighed, "I really do understand, but I'm still your mother. I just want our family back together." I let her words hang for a moment. Once, I would have rushed back, desperate to mend everything, but I wasn't that person anymore. I had learned the hard way that they wouldn't change unless I forced them to see me as an equal. "I'll think about it," I repeated, echoing my earlier response. This time not as a retreat, but as a pause to ensure they truly understood that I wasn't an afterthought anymore. "All right," Mom said softly. "I hope you come back soon. I just want you to be happy." I ended the call and sat back, breathing deeply. It wasn't over. It wasn't a neat, clean resolution, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore, and maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me for who I truly am. I put my phone down and stared out the window, watching the snow gently fall into the darkness. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt free. And as for Christmas, it wasn't ruined. For the first time, I was choosing to care for myself first. Everything else could wait. As I sat there, letting the snow drift softly outside, I couldn't help but wonder, did I do the right thing, or had I just walked away from something that could have been fixed? Let me know in the comments. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in the quiet clarity of solitude. I began meeting with a therapist, someone who helped me understand that my pain wasn't just about a dinner table or a family photograph. It was about years of feeling invisible. With every session, I grew stronger, more certain of my worth, and more prepared to confront the past without being chained to it. Weeks later, my phone buzzed again with messages. This time, they weren't laden with anger or guilt, but cautious hope. Chris reached out first. Maya, we've been doing a lot of thinking. We realize we've hurt you more than we ever imagined. We miss you. Slowly, one by one, my siblings and parents began sharing their regrets and their willingness to change. There were no dramatic declarations or empty promises, just sincere admissions that, in trying to keep up appearances, they had lost sight of what truly mattered. Family, in its raw and imperfect form. It took a few more days of honest conversation, mostly through heartfelt texts and calls where emotions were laid bare, before I agreed to a face-to-face meeting. We chose a small, quiet cafe away from the familiar battleground of old traditions. Sitting together, I looked into their eyes, not for blame, but for the recognition that we were all hurting. I explained how every birthday, every holiday, and every family gathering had felt like a reminder of my insignificance. I told them about my therapy sessions, about learning to value myself without the need for their validation. My parents listened in silence, their eyes growing moist with regret. Chris and Amy admitted they had been trapped by their own expectations, too blind to see that their version of perfect was costing us our connection. For the first time in years, we all talked openly, not just about the past, but about what we needed moving forward. We agreed to seek family counseling together, to learn to appreciate one another without forcing each other into roles. By the end of our meeting, we didn't have all the answers or a complete fix, but we had a genuine start. I left the cafe with a lightness in my step, knowing that while the scars might never fully disappear, they no longer defined our future. In that moment, I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing to write a new chapter. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, heard, and truly valued, not as the family's perpetual child, but as a person with a voice of her own. As Christmas approached once again, we planned a modest gathering, not at my parents' imposing Victorian house, but at a cozy rented space where everyone could be equal. We created new traditions, ones that honored our individual journeys while celebrating our collective desire to grow together. And so, with a sense of cautious optimism and newfound respect for each other, we stepped into a future that was imperfect but full of hope. A future where each of us could finally be the person we were meant to be.